Hello, everyone, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven.
I'm Paul Balogh.
And I am Matt Dodson. I'm the technical content writer at K6.
Woohoo!
Yay! Welcome, Matt, to Office Hours. Finally, we've been trying to get
Yes.
you on. How long have you been at K6 now?
Time is like really compressed in K6 months, but I think it's 7 months now, which feels like
Really?
3.5 years. Yeah, yeah.
You're like old guard now.
Yeah, that is
Right.
actually, that is, yeah.
Yeah. So, what made you join K6? How did we convince you to come over to our side?
I was, before I was working as a freelance technical writer, and like I became really into open source and different things. I actually, to be honest, I didn't really know K6. Um, but I don't know. I just saw that job post and I saw it was connected with Grafana, who I knew. And then I saw this is kind of lame, but I actually like the license, the open source license. So actually, I even applied because of the AGPL license because that's a license I think is good for open source. And then I won't say his name, but we all know who is our the head of DevRel. I don't know if he wants his name. So I sent him my portfolio and he liked it, and that was that. This is a great job.
That's funny.
Okay, I have to. Did you get cookies?
I did
I
not
didn't get
get
cookies.
cookies.
I did not get cookies. I don't know what Leandro's talking about.
I got
Yeah.
this, a notebook,
I don't
the one
know.
thing I
Yeah.
needed most.
As a technical writer,
This that was the thing that was holding me back. Yeah.
Oh, so I did forget, Leandro. I'm glad Leandro piped up there because I wanted to talk about the awesome video that Leandro just made, which is the KSIX or K6 news. And it's about the latest release of K6 OSS, which is version 0.40, and also some other new things on the horizon, like stuff about K6 Cloud and other extensions. Also, on stuff for Leandro, he's also going to be going to Star West. He and Vince Huang, another person on the team, is going to be there next week. So if you happen to be going to Star West, go and bug them if you see them for stickers and swag. He's our
Yeah,
chief swag officer, Leandro is. So I'm sure
exactly.
he'll have something to give you.
Yeah, and it's in Anaheim, right? So bring your mouse ears.
And I heard you're going somewhere next week as well, Paul.
I am. I'm going to lovely Chicago, which is going to be nice and cold for me, which I'm not a fan of the cold, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a Gopher Con. So I'm really looking forward to going to that. And then this will be actually the first GopherCon for me in person. So I'm kind of excited about it. But I'll be doing a lightning talk there about, K6 and shifting left and all that good stuff. So yeah, if anybody's going there, I'm gonna have some limited swag, but I will have some swag. I don't rate as much as Senior Performo. I can't do the rolling R quite as good. So
Yeah, so next week I'm also going to be in Amsterdam at a Grafana Live event. So if you're going, you can feel free to ask me. Well, I will be demoing K6 and K6 Cloud over there, so ask me all your questions there too. But asking questions is what this episode is all about. Because I think Matt is awesome at asking questions, among other things. You don't just ask questions. But I do think that there's a lot in performance testing or in SRE that, I mean, just the fact that we always say SRE, like it's a jargon filled industry, and there's just so much to learn that you can't possibly know them all.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And like one thing I think like if somebody asked me how to be a technical writer, for me the number one thing is like have no shame about feeling ignorant or stupid. Not no shame at all, but no shame about feeling ignorant or asking a stupid question because like I think maybe sometimes just trying to ask the most basic things can really clear things up. And like Also, if I have to document something or write about it, it's very uncomfortable if I don't know what I'm saying. So, I want to try to tease out all the questions.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and it's like engineers, any engineers in that. I mean, a lot of times we take a lot for granted, thinking that, oh yeah, whoever this documentation that we've written for, understands all the stuff. So it's definitely nice to have somebody, as you said, to ask those questions. I'm not going to say ask dumb questions or anything like that. It's not. No, there are no dumb questions.
It's all right. If you want to sometime in this next hour, you'd be like,
No.
okay, that was too stupid. It's all right.
No,
It's
no.
fine. No,
Not at
it's cool.
all.
It's cool.
No.
No.
That was more like a 4-year-old question. All right, we got
Yeah.
a 5-year-old to cut off.
No, this is a safe space.
Yeah,
Anyone here,
exactly.
especially like even people who are watching us, anyone can ask questions, and we promise not to judge. This is the time to
Oh yeah,
ask.
yeah,
The newbier, the better.
Yep.
We
yeah.
can't promise we'll
Exactly.
answer correctly, but
Yeah.
you can ask.
You can roast my questions. We're not going to roast anybody. Just coming from the
No.
from the comments.
Well,
Oh,
yeah.
no, I wanted to mention also like the other thing from talking to you all, because you all are like experienced testers or in some capacity, especially Nicole. No offense, Paul, but Paul was on the development
None
side.
taken.
But one thing is now, like after working through the docs and talking a lot to our engineers, I mean, I would say some parts of the JavaScript API are still really, really foreign to me, but the basic implementing and basic scripting, I kind of have down. I wouldn't say down, but like I feel comfortable working through it and knowing what it does. And now I feel like I have some good knowledge of how to do something in K6, or like if you give me some kind of like problem, I could maybe solve it like with a little scripting. But I have no idea really. I guess I shouldn't admit this, but I have really no idea like why I would do anything. Like so, because I still don't really have a good context of even what load testing is. So like that's what I want us to bridge, is maybe like some people know why they would want to do use checks or thresholds or whatever, but maybe they don't know how. That's what the doc should show. And then maybe other people know how to do JavaScript like in every kind of way, but they don't know why. So that's why I'm happy to have this.
Awesome. That's we need something like that. We need to be talking more about these things. But Paul, have you thought about how you might actually explain load testing to a 5-year-old?
Well, my kids are older than that, but sometimes I have to use the same, level on some of this stuff, because they'll be like, I'll tell them something about work, and then they'll be like, what are you talking about? But yeah, no, well, how would I explain load testing? Well, it's an unfortunate thing, but so back in we had Super Bowl, and then largest televised thing, and this is a bad experience for those involved, unfortunately. But do you remember they had that QR code that was like bouncing around on the screen?
Okay, I'm gonna say you've got some smart 5-year-olds over there, because they already know about QR
QR codes, yeah,
and
yeah.
they have like cultural
Oops.
references from like before
Yeah.
they're born.
See, and here we go. There we go. You see, I'm taking for granted everybody knows what a QR code is, right? No. But yeah, but
Literally not me. Not
yeah.
Oh, look, Marie has a really awesome analogy. Load testing is like that game Overcooked, where your kitchen goes on fire if it can't handle the high amount of orders from your customers.
There we go.
That's awesome. I love that game. Love, hate that game.
I was gonna say,
See, now I don't
like,
know that one.
it's like
So it's a game where your goal is to cook, to follow like this recipe, and you're supposed to work together to get it done. But it just gets faster and faster, and you get more and more orders with more and more complex recipes, and it gets at some point you're just not going to be able to catch up.
Oh, see, I think of that as the pie factory, where you have the pies on a conveyor belt, and it's just kind of going along, and you've seen it on a lot of sitcoms too. I'm sure that scenario played out, and all of a sudden, finally, the pies are just going on the floor.
I'd say maybe it's like a sort of like, imagine if we got dad sitting in a chair, and how many donuts can dad eat before the chair breaks? And that's what a load test is. We keep increasing load until something breaks. And then we just say,
Yeah.
now, instead of a chair, it's a distributed computing system. And instead of donuts, it's a WebSocket.
Another thing that I did, it's not just 5-year-olds, it's like, parents and
Yeah.
relatives who aren't in tech. And what I normally say is like, when there's some big shopping season like Black Friday or something
Mm.
like that, you know how it gets really hard to buy something because there's just so many people doing the same thing. I'm trying to figure out how to do that before the sale so that that doesn't happen, when
Yeah.
you're actually trying to buy something. Or if it's an actual 5-year-old, I might say something like, imagine that there's a baker who wants to make as many cakes as he can. And you can, if you want to do that, you have to first know how long it normally takes to bake a cake. You have to know the steps, and maybe you start and stop the timer at a different part, in different areas of it, like how many cakes are you even going to buy, or like, what kind of cakes there are. It gets kind of complicated, but in general, it's all about making that faster. Like, it's increasing the number of cakes he can get. Maybe that means that he can't do it on his own. Maybe that means he has to get Matt in to help him out with that. Or maybe he just needs to work better. Like when there's something that's in the oven and you're waiting, instead of just waiting for that cake to bake, maybe you could be working on the next one.
I love that. That's perfect.
I don't know. It's really difficult. There's also like the actual physical load testing, like how much weight can a bridge hold?
Yeah.
How do you know what weight it should hold? Because you can't just take into account the number of people that walk by. What about cars? It kind of makes a difference if it's in a zone where it's pedestrian only, or if like large trucks can pass by.
And is this the time to do a little teaser for XK6 civil engineering? Because we're going to module.
Oh, I thought it was going to be a real thing you were going to plug.
No. Sorry, that is definitely fake. Do not
Bridge
mistake it.
testing.
Test
Yeah.
safety critical civil engineering
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah. So I guess it's really difficult to explain to a 5-year-old, right? But probably there are no 5-year-olds watching this. So in general, I would say that load testing is a way to simulate users, real users, before something goes live, before a program or an application or maybe a feature of an app goes live. It's like a way to prevent these issues where your site or your app gets completely unusable because of the number of people that are using it.
I like that. And maybe we could say explain like I'm grandma instead of explain like I'm 5.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that.
I like that. That's actually one of the things I think about. It's like how to explain it to somebody, just a normal person, not someone who has no industry knowledge.
Mhm.
The first question, this is okay because I really don't know this. So imagine I get somehow by some quirk of fate, start working as a load tester tomorrow, and like I walk into the load testing or to the software application center, and like the CEO is like, "Oh my God, we're so glad you're here. Come on." They take me up to the top boardrooms. The load tester's here, and the room is real quiet. They say, okay, we really need some load testing like right away for this application. What would I do after that? So what's like the first thing I would even do? How do I even approach that?
Do you want to go, Paul?
Sure. I mean, what are you testing? I mean, you got to know some of the things like what are the what are the entry points? What are those endpoints? That's what you're going to have to figure out first. Where are you going to introduce the load? How are people coming in through the site or whatever it is you're testing? I mean, obviously you got to know what it is you're wanting to test.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say e-commerce site.
I have a similar response, but I think mine would be more why. Like you're saying, oh, you really need load testing. Why? Was there a production issue? Are you just trying to prepare for something that you think might go viral? Or is it super important to do it at a particular time because there's something coming up? Like, what are, you know, I think those are very different things. If you say, there was a production issue. Okay, well, let's start there. Why did that happen? Has it been reproduced? What were the components that were involved in it? Do we already know what caused it? Has it been fixed? That's where I would start. But if you're like, oh, this is an entirely new application, we don't really know what load we're going to expect, it's like, oh, that's a different story because you have no information to go on. You can't go back and check any historical metrics. So I think that's probably what I would try to understand. I think Leandra is saying too, what's the problem with the load? Yeah, what do you want to find out through load testing? Kind of like also what Paul said. Like, what is the purpose of this? Because they're different. They're very different ones. It might be that they say like, oh, we already have an application and it's super performant. We're just releasing this new feature. That's also different, right? Because
Mhm.
then they might already have load testing scripts for the rest of the application. I just have to worry about that small little part. There's
Okay.
also a comment from W4DD325. I usually start by requesting a walkthrough of the app and ask where the concerns are. Yeah,
Sounds
that's really
reasonable to
good
me.
as well.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let's say like oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I know that like this is like the classic example always like Black Friday, you got the thing, but Black Friday is only one day a year right for now. We'll see. Maybe the big shopping industry is making more Black Fridays. But like let's talk about what I'm trying to think about is like people in their daily, like, we really just want to test the system. We want to know what we could do. We're good. We're talking about ongoing operations, like how do we handle things? What is going to break us? Is that the kind of thing that an executive asks, or not an executive necessarily, like the person who contracts a load tester?
Yeah, so sometimes that would be like, it could be a test manager, a project manager, could be like a development or engineering manager. It kind of depends also on the size of and structure of the company. But yeah, what you're saying is kind of like they don't have, it seems like a situation where they don't have a big event that where they have really like peak load, but they just kind of want to build confidence in the application,
Yeah.
just in its general workings. I'd probably try to understand what the components are that are involved. There was a question early on from Eli Bariki John. So this is an example of the sort of thing that I would try to find out earlier on. When you have a shared Kubernetes environment for testing before production environment, how to develop and perform performance testing in different microservice systems. So this is maybe a little complicated for a 5-year-old, but this is the sort of thing that can change the entire plan, the entire test plan. And that's because load testing a monolith is very different from testing a microservices based system. And he's also talked about it seems like they have a testing environment and a production environment. That's pretty lucky. Not every company or not every project has that luxury. That will also affect how aggressive we can be. Because if it's just a testing environment, then you're not so nervous about bringing it down. If it were a production environment, it would be like, okay, let's be more careful about it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And then that actually brings up another point I was gonna make is so like this is the main thing from really day one when I've been thinking about load testing. Like I'm negative because I'm thinking there's so many moving parts. There's so much different things, especially when we get to like, really, really complex modern DevOps infrastructure. There's so much moving around. So I think like this experimental environment is too noisy. Everything is changing all the time. It's like, where do I even start? I mean, should I start at the very top? Should I just isolate one component? Like what's even, and I started thinking like, why even do this? I'll never get any kind of result that I can reproduce. I don't know what I'm even gonna, what I'm testing.
Yeah. Well, Eli Bariki is saying that he has a shared Kubernetes environment, which is different again because, yes, you can be more aggressive in testing than in production. But if you're sharing it with I don't know if this is a staging or a testing environment, but you could be sharing it with testers or developers or other people whose jobs might be blocked if you bring their
You bring it
environment down.
down.
Yeah, so definitely I would start like you were saying, Matt, I would start as small as possible, like maybe just do component testing first and then
Sorry, what was
test
that?
each component, testing components separately rather than just testing end to end right away. And that way you can sort of get an idea for how how things flow, like how does the traffic actually flow through the system in different user flows, and then also try to get an idea for which components are probably going to be an issue, ones that are maybe under spec, or maybe the code is not very efficient.
Can
It's
we back up two
sure.
steps actually? One, what exactly is a component in this conversation? What are we talking about?
I mean, I would
It
say like a microservice or like a resource, so having a database server or
Okay.
that type of thing. Basically, anything that would be a little bit different of a block or something on a diagram, on
Yeah.
somebody's drawing.
yeah, yeah.
And so Nicole said you could maybe get an idea of which will be troublesome. How would you even know? So you're just testing these different components of the diagram. Like, how would I get even an idea that, oh, that could be an issue or not?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's where you gotta use some of those, the observability tools, so things like, like with Grafana and all that, but then you need to establish, like, a baseline. In other words, production, if it's an existing system, maybe, look at production's, current, how things look in the observability platform. It's like, where are response rates pretty much hovering most of the time, and kind of establish that. And that's where I guess you get into all your SLOs and A's and all that good stuff. But your agreement, and then you can check
I'm
That's
against
why
that.
That's why I was asking, like, why do you want to do the load testing? Because that might also explain if they have production incidents. Then I would
Hmm.
take a risk-based approach and focus on those components. And also, like, even looking at a diagram of a system, you can see like maybe there's a payment gateway here, and then here there's a database for that holds email addresses and information from people that sign up to a newsletter. It's like, yes, they could, but you could test them both. And, obviously, we always want to test everything. But the reality is that our time is probably limited. The payment gateway is probably where I'd start and where I'd focus
Yeah,
because that
things
has
that
legal
affect dollars.
implications.
so
And
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah,
I
follow
guess
the money.
I mean, I still don't really understand like what phenomenon would make me say, okay, this is an issue or this is okay. I guess that's maybe when we could talk about like looking at the metrics. But like when we look at a kind of a diagram, there's usually a flow. And I guess when we make a network request, it's going through some kind of crazy, system through routers and different applications. And so like, would this be a strategy where you just say, okay, if something is slow early, it's going to slow everything down later. So like, would it be a strategy to just start with like the first point and then go down through to the application and back? Would that make sense or no?
It could be, yeah, like what Eli Bariki is saying here. He's got a microservices based architecture. I would look for things that everything passes through, common points of failure, because that might affect everything else. And usually in microservices based stuff, there needs to be some sort of traffic controller, like a proxy that will prevent issues like like retry storms, because one of the problems with microservices is that because they're individual components rather than just one big thing, they don't really always know what the others are doing. So it's kind of like the three of us here. If we were a microservices system, then I could just be like, hey Paul, hey Paul, hey Paul, how about now? Are you ready now? How about now? And Paul's just like, shut up, just let me do my work, you know. But
Are we there
And
yet? Are
if
we
there
there yet?
wasn't
Are we there yet?
exactly, like if there wasn't someone like Matt to say, okay, Nicole, leave Paul alone for now because he's busy doing stuff. I'm like, okay, well then I'll wait. If there's no mechanism like that, that's something that you could see on a diagram, and that's going to be a problem. So there's
okay,
some
okay.
things that you can see just from the structure.
Hmm.
By the way, if anyone wants to know what it's like to work at K6, it's pretty much exactly like what Nicole just described, except it's Paul doing all the hassling. That's pretty much how our internal meetings break down every time. Um,
No, it's great.
I, I have one more question about like, do you ever get into like a trap, or do you ever say like, oh, this is something that like maybe when I started, or that somebody who doesn't have a good sense of the system, is there something that could kind of like trick you when you're planning things out?
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
Go for it.
absolutely, right? I mean, I don't, there's always rabbit holes, right? Something looks like, oh, wait, I see smoke over there or something. I don't know what, but, and it's just, oh, no, that's not it at all, and you waste cycles there. But I don't know, you're always going to have that. It's just kind of determining when are you going to cut it where it's at and then switch to something else. You know, that's going to be the issue, I guess.
Sorry, I just want to quickly go through some questions. I want to answer some of Ellie Bariki's questions.
Yeah, we've had a
So yeah,
very active comments
Thank
today.
you. Thank you, everyone.
yeah, it's great. So to answer this question, I think my strategy would be to test each service, depending if you can, or take a risk-based approach and test the ones that are that everything that goes through or are high risk, like the payment gateway or something like that, and then try to. You can kind of use service virtualization and stubbing and mocking to isolate them so that you can test them individually, especially since it's in a shared environment, and then slowly increase that scope and just communicate it to everyone involved.
Yeah, and
Um,
and as you were saying on the isolation, that's really, I guess, the key. And that's one of those things where in a Kubernetes environment, if you have the capacity or ability to do it, I mean, you can install everything into its own namespace. Kind of a
yeah.
bogus namespace, and then that way, then you can isolate things, and it's not in there. It's in the overall system, shared system, but hopefully you can isolate it easily enough that
I,
you can do the testing.
I did not know exactly what that last part was about, but
The
I don't know exactly what it
namespace.
was. Yeah, I think like that's like a whole rabbit hole we could go down. Maybe we could post
Maybe
a
we
link
can
like
do another
afterwards.
one, like, yeah, like everything you wanted to know about Kubernetes. We were
Yeah.
too
Afraid
afraid
to
to
ask.
ask.
It starts with
Yeah.
what is Kubernetes, and that's probably going to go on for 3 or 4 more episodes.
Yeah,
Um,
right, right.
Another
uh,
question. When using a GraphQL endpoint in microservices, how can you conduct performance testing? I am posting a link in the chat for how we did this. We used GraphQL. Well, we particularly used Hasura in conjunction with K6 to test something like that. GraphQL is a query language for APIs, kind of like how REST is also the same way, but GraphQL is primarily used for like retrieving elements rather than structuring web services. So it's kind of like a database, and you can query, you can send queries. You can also do that in K6, by the way. So I'd say that the strategy is probably not that different. It's just a difference in like in protocol and in queries.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna just trust Nicole is totally correct there. I think she's right.
I watch the video. That's
Yeah,
we go into it a bit more in detail.
it's a really good question, and I think I see that kind of question come up like a few different times in the forums and in the channels. Yeah, so it's a great question.
Another one that
One more.
sorry, you go.
No, let's should we?
Okay. This one I wanted to do for sure because we get this question a lot, variations of this. How many users should I have? How many users can my system handle? And I wish that we could say, oh, it's 1,024 users.
Yep.
You know, we can't really. It's really it's not a it feels like a cop out to say, but we really can't know how many you should try to run with. The best strategy for determining number of users, you could start small depending on the kind of system it is. Like if you already have historical metrics and you know that you typically handle 1,000 users on a peak hour or something, then maybe you can start with that. And I really like the stepped pattern too. Like you have, for example, if your starting point is 100 users, you ramp up to 100 and then sustain that for a certain amount of time. Could be 10 minutes, could be 30 minutes, depending on what you're testing. And then you ramp up again. So add another 100. So ramp up and then there's another. So it's like like stairs. That way you give the system enough time to like be running at that level of load, and you can definitely see like, oh, when it hit 1,000,
Yeah.
that's when it actually started to go haywire, meaning the response times increased or errors increased, or a bunch of other issues that could happen.
And
Yep.
this is what we call a like a stress test, right? Like you're just increasing load and seeing what happens, and increasing load and seeing what happens until things are unacceptable. Is that more or less, or no?
Yeah, you could. It's usually like higher than that. This seems like the way that he asked it. It's more like exploratory. Like he
Mhm.
really has no idea. Stress is like, oh, I know that this can handle 300 users. Let's try it with 1,000, or you could go soak and do 300, but for longer.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. We do have docs on that. I was gonna
Yep.
say,
Ramping VUs, right?
and I did not write them, but I have read them. I was gonna say, so another thing I was working on is you all put together your well, it's partly a workshop. It's like kind of a template for different ways to learn K6 Learn, a repo. And like when I was going through that actually that was talking about, bridging how and why. That was really useful for me to see different examples. So I guess we could plug that repo. It's a work in progress, but we're building on it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I remember like the best thing for me was the first part about realistic tests, and also the load cycles. The stages of the load test. And so like I think right, you broke it down into planning, scripting, execution, and then I guess analysis. Yeah. And I think right now we're talking about planning. So maybe like could I summarize what we've been talking about, where for this planning, it's like the first thing is to just tell me if I'm wrong. It's cool. Maybe the first thing is to get some idea of what we're trying to test and why, and maybe make some kind of objective performance goals for whatever our system is. And then maybe the second thing is say, like, I want to look at some diagrams and see what's happening. Do you have any diagrams so I can see what's going on throughout the network? Would that be like a pretty good start?
Yeah, I think so. Let me share my screen here too. Wow, this is like a bigger topic than I thought. I think we needed more
Well, yeah,
time.
that's why like we got to be careful, because I think we only have an
Rabbit
hour,
hole.
and like yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why it's like
Yeah.
namespaces. I'm just gonna comment that I don't know exactly what that is. I know they're one honking great idea according to the Zen of Python, and that's all I know about.
So here's some stuff. I made a video about how to plan for a load test. It's a video, so like I can't possibly put everything, but in general, here are some things that you can look at, like the scope, the requirements. I always like to start with a why. Every good test begins with requirements. There's also entry criteria. How do you know when you can actually start? For example, there's no point in stress testing a system that doesn't even functionally work. There has to be an agreement as to when you can actually say end-to-end performance testing can begin, for instance. Or like there's so much. There's workload modeling, like, how the plan for the shape and distribution of the load, the stubs I was talking about, monitoring and observability.
Oh, yeah.
So
I guess
sorry.
no. I just remembered Nicole recommended the book The Art of Application Performance Testing. I read like the first 2 or 3 chapters. I remember he was talking about having use cases, understanding what is the use case for this. Like, so, is the user going to log in? Are they, some people are going to just log in and not do anything, or are people going to log in and buy something? And so I guess you have to come up also with some kind of like probable flows. I guess that's a really important part of planning.
Yeah. And also, you might like this, W4DD325. How much emphasis would you place on documentation, test plan, or approach?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt you here. I'm going to say pretty much if you document it all, I mean, it's going to live in all of our minds, and you don't even need to implement anything because we can use our, if it's so well documented, it will be like it's real and nothing else has to happen. That's the correct answer, right?
I think they were talking about in terms of the test plan.
Yeah, me too.
This has changed a bit. I think, I don't know, at least when I started testing, it was always like you have to have an official, 30-page test plan and stuff. With Agile, I think that has changed a little bit. Sometimes it's also our sprints have, we use sprints now as well. It used to be that like you might have to do a 1 year long, cycle, or if you can even call it a cycle. And in that case, maybe you do need to plan out more things. But if you're doing like 1 or 2 week sprints, then I would reduce the documentation accordingly. I think depending on the scope, this also depends on the size of your team, right? How many people are doing it? How much can you get done? I personally think as long as you agree on the format, I think sometimes bullet points are fine within a team.
Yeah, that's that's something else. I think because I'm seeing. I don't know if we're gonna get to everything we want to talk about. Maybe, but like
I know.
one other thing. One other thing I remember I read in that book is that it sounded like the book was a little dated. The information is really really good, but it's from. I don't want to say it's dated. It's from like at least 10 years ago.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's dated.
So well, this is like the eternal youth of the software industry. Yeah. But like I remember it sounded like, I don't want to say something that the author wouldn't endorse, but the way I read it was that it sounds like you have to kind of be an expert and you need to do a lot of planning to make a load test. And like, it's not the kind of thing that you can just go do in one day, or maybe like that you could do without a lot of expertise. Do you think that's still true, or is maybe there's degrees to this? I don't know.
What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely degrees to it, but I would say a load test would take a little bit more planning. It should be a little bit more, thought beforehand. Because
Why?
why? I guess it just depends on what you're testing. So if you have an isolated environment, then yeah, have at it. Go nuts. Bring it down, whatever. But a lot of times people are doing some of this stuff in their production systems, just kind of like taking it up to the edge. They don't want to really bring it down. They want to see how things are behaving. So that's one where it's like, yeah, a little forethought might benefit, it might
Okay.
behoove you. So rather than, creating a true production outage. I mean, that's, similar with some of the chaos experimentation and that. I mean, you don't really want to break production completely. You just want to kind of push and see what, where the weak spots are. what really needs to be fixed.
I
You don't. Mm,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I agree because I think that what people think of when they're thinking of load testing is usually execution. It's can you run a test against this environment? And the answer is usually yes, but what kind of test is it going to be? Maybe you didn't even test the right thing. If the problem is to if the reason for the testing is to find out a particular issue that's happening under a certain circumstance, sometimes it takes a lot of time to figure out what that circumstance is, like the right mix of users and test throughput, like how many requests per second you're sending, or maybe it has to do with the payload, like the size of the payload. Like, yes, you can run something, but is it going to be valuable? I think it's hard to do in a day. I mean, the reality is like you go in, and I've been contracted for a day, and in my experience, more often than not, they're like, "Oh yeah, we just wanted to hire you for the day." I'm like, "Great. Do I have access to stuff?" And they're like, "Oh, well, no." Like, "Okay, well, there's your day."
Free money.
I mean, the reality is that people underestimate how much it can take to really understand something, especially with these like microservices based systems. Just because there is a diagram doesn't mean it's correct, and it doesn't mean that everybody has actually understood it. Oftentimes when performance testers get into a project, you are for the first time tracing the root of a message through the entire system in a way that nobody has ever. Each component is managed by like this separate team that don't really care what happens before or after. Like that's the
Right.
reality of it. And you can't do that in like an hour.
Yeah. Can you do anything reasonable in like a short amount of time? I mean, are there some load tests where you could just do, because maybe it sounds like it's really resource and human intensive. So is there something that we could do, just like a little tiny test that would be useful in some way?
Contract tests.
Okay.
Just to assert basically that your API is returning what your consumers are expecting it to return.
Yeah.
That's something that you do with one VU, maybe even just one iteration, just a quick little test to make sure that stuff is your specs are being adhered to.
And
Yeah. And if you have endpoints, like if they already have endpoints that are available because you don't need access to them, you can script against it. And then, if you have very little time, they might just say, do it at these virtual user levels. You can do that. The problem is there's going to be a problem at some point. You're going to run into some performance issues, and they're going to say, well, why? And you're like, well, this today was about running it. Figuring out the results is going to take time, and it's going to take experimentation, because at that point you might be running like an end-to-end test, with 10 different components. Now you're asking me to just magically know which component it was. Well, I need to know what they are first. But like running it, yeah, sure, here are the results. Can't say I'll be able to advise you as to what to do next to improve it.
um, I think we're like kind of moving into the scripting side of things, and actually even in some of the results. And so like I want to know that this is a serious question, because I see this all the time, but I'm going to bring this discourse back down a little bit. Okay, I know I've seen a lot of times it says you need to add sleep. I know like a lot of our example scripts, they have a user sleeping. And I see everybody says sleep time is so important. Sleep time is so important. Think time is sometimes called. And like honestly, what I'm thinking is, I mean, I'm programming these VUs. They need to do something. I say don't sleep. Like, you can sleep when you're not executing. It's like I'm gonna put you to work when you're running my load test. Like, why sleep? Why not just keep doing things over and over? Like, isn't that more efficient? I mean, stop like literally sleeping on the job is what we're programming them to do, and saying that's okay. Maybe that's Swedish load testing.
I think I was probably the person that put sleep in a lot of those. The main reason is that at the bare minimum, there are two different servers you need to be looking at. One is your application server. Let's say it's like super simple, right? And it's just one component kind of thing. And then the other one is your load generator. You should also be looking at the health of that, because if you get into the situation where it's sending requests faster than it really should be able to, then it's no longer realistic. Now, there are cases where you want that, right? There are cases where it's just like, as quickly as possible, just send the requests. So it is still valid sometimes, but in general, when people are doing like an end-to-end test for a website, real users don't send requests as fast as is possible for computers. Real users would stop and browse a page and stuff. And if you don't script it that way, then it might paint a picture that's worse than it actually is. Then you get into the rabbit hole of tuning and optimizing and spending money that really you didn't need to do because real users never had that problem. And the other reason is that it's also unduly stressing out the load generator, because sometimes you don't have a super spec'd out load generator. Sometimes you're just using your like some spare laptop or whatever. So when you don't give it when you don't put sleeps, the chances are higher that you're going to push that load generator itself into an unhealthy state.
Okay.
Where it can't even handle the number of requests and responses that it's receiving. And then you get bad results, but it wasn't because of your application. It was because of your test. So you're just like trying to remove that variable. You want to make sure what you're doing is not, it's like the observer effect. You want to remove that as much as possible.
That's such a great answer. I don't even have any little joke to say. But one thing, what is the observer effect? That was I got lost right at the last second.
Yeah, sorry. Like in quantum mechanics, when you get into like there is an area of physics, like in quantum physics, when you watch something like you're performing an experiment, just you being there affects the experiment. And
okay.
I was worried we were going to get into the explain it like I'm a PhD.
Oh, I'm not a quantum physicist.
Okay. No, that's a great answer. And then I'm seeing we got like some questions coming about results. And I guess like one other thing I was going to ask about documenting. I thought that question about documentation was about documenting your use cases in the script, but maybe that's more about documenting the planning. I guess we could talk about that some other time.
Okay.
Or I don't know.
Yeah, let's go through. Paul, I'm going to ask you this question. Would you consider running 3 test runs to get an average or confidence in results to be best practice?
Yeah, the more the better, actually. I mean, because then you're just like with anything, you get a larger sample set, you're going to have more realistic results. So yeah, no, definitely no less than 3 to establish that baseline. I mean,
I agree. Confidence is key. Yeah. Whatever makes your team feel comfortable.
Exactly. And then this is one of those things too, when you start, that baseline can continue to evolve, as you do more executions of your tests. So like, with everything kind of shifting left to try to get developers to do some of this testing, on the front end, I guess, not literally the front end of applications, but anyway, the hope is that, you can conduct these tests in every one of their builds. So as they push a merge request up, it, this automatically goes and runs, and you can check against, okay, how am I compared to the baseline? Am I, out of threshold, or am I in? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Sorry, Matt. There's lots of questions and comments. Okay, this is a comment, not a question. We've been caught by corporate proxies filtering all requests. Picking where you run a test from, I found imperative. Otherwise, we just load test or kind of DDoS attack the proxy server. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I like to say that the difference between a load test and a DDoS attack is consent. And I definitely think that it can stray into that. And lots of load testers are inadvertently DDoSing, for example, production when they mean to be testing a test environment. Yes, you can decide to run it within a corporate firewall, for instance, but you also have to tailor it to where the real users are. Like if your real users are within that corporate firewall, then then you're good. But if it's a public facing app, then maybe not so good.
Yeah. I mean, this is like something that somebody was running into recently with the IP addresses, and it was too few IP addresses, and all this these activity was coming from a small number of IPs. Well, the firewall was kind of catching on to that and started limiting those IPs. So it's like, oh, we need more IPs, and or change the firewall rules.
So I guess in that you have to change the. Oh no, I'm sorry. Just like you have to change the firewalls. You do lose some realism, but it's acceptable maybe because otherwise, like you're gonna have, I don't know, maybe thousands or millions of load generators.
Yeah.
Or do some kind of IP spoofing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's yeah.
It's not
ideally
a simple thing.
Yeah, maybe you should try both. There are some things it's still valuable to do it within a firewall or within the same network, but just that shouldn't be the end all and be all. You'll still see some performance bottlenecks probably that you can do it, you can bring to light that way, but it's just you have to know that there's a big asterisk to those results.
Okay.
This is an easy one. Rose
Yay.
says, any chance you guys are thinking about creating some sort of course that leads you through using K6? I would definitely do that course. Learn how to use it with Kubernetes, etc. Well, it's funny you should say that. We totally are. So I linked some time ago, I'll put it again. One on, we have something that we're calling K6 Learn. And right now it's a GitHub repo. Okay, but a lot of the content that we're going to be putting in the course is already there. So you can go through it there already, but we will come out with like a more interactive and hands-on course for sure.
Yeah. And for anybody that's following the social media for K6 Testing Tuesday, that's kind of a source for a lot of the questions. So
yeah. And I one thing I like about this, kind of a side note, one thing I like about working with K6 is we pretty much all work just out in the open. Like, by the way, if you're wondering what's happening in the docs, you could just go to K6 docs/issues. You'll see like my very obsessively made issues, but like, so, we got this K6 Learn. We're just working on it right now. It's not perfect, but you can see what's happening, and I think it's getting better over time. So
yeah.
And hopefully it'll be like something really great. Oh, God.
Are there any differences in performance testing of microservices and SOA architecture?
Wait, what's SOA architecture?
Yeah, service-oriented architecture. It's one of those things, really. I mean, to me, it's like everything old is new again. It's kind of marketing. It's really the same concept, but rebranded. But service-oriented architecture, it's basically like the separation into those components of all these different services. So like, maybe you have your inventory service that, you would call into to say, hey, how many widgets of, XYZ do I have? And you would have another service that is your actual like e-shopping cart and things like that. And they're just separate applications deployed separately, i.e. non-monolithic. What's a monolith? Is that going to be the next one? I always see, I'm always kind of apprehensive because I see Matt be like, it's like almost like chess moves. It's like, okay, if I move here, is he going to move,
I saw that movie 2001. I know what a monolith is. It's a giant black onyx.
That's how the suns are created.
So, I kind of think of microservices as an implementation of service-oriented architecture, as a concept. Service-oriented architecture came first, but not all SOA is microservices. You can micro is smaller and it's, I guess, more atomic. But you could have more of them like in a larger scope, and that would still technically be services oriented.
Yeah, it's definitely an evolution. I mean, it's
Charlie
keeps
recommends
changing.
learning JavaScript through load test scripts, which Matt wrote. Oh, I need to find that. Yes, that is an awesome blog post that Matt wrote, which documents his learning.
Can I say also one reason I wrote that was because, well, I had to learn how to use K6, obviously, and I have no programming experience, like really none at all. Maybe just some like little shell scripting. So one reason is to show, like, I mean, I don't know if I could do it, you can probably do it. So if people are wondering, like, what's like, oh, this is JavaScript, I don't know how to do it, it's not that bad, really. And like also load testing is like a very precise or very specific form of writing JavaScript, writing load test K6 scripts. So it's I mean, I say that you can do it because I could do it, so I'm very confident you can. I don't even know who you are.
Rose is
I know
saying,
Charlie.
figuring out what is causing issues after finding them is such a big issue for me. I don't really know how to investigate that. Any advice? That's exactly what I was saying, that the running of the test is the easiest part, I think. And after that would probably be the scripting. I find that the coolest part of it is the results, and also maybe like talking to people and figuring out how things get put together. But yeah, how strategies for finding bottlenecks.
That's a good question.
Where do we? It is a great question.
Yeah, that's definitely the hardest part.
Yeah, let me share this part. I would start. I've been working on this thing, common issues in load testing results. It's not done. I mean, I can post it, but these are some things that I'm trying to put together for common patterns that I see in load testing results. So sometimes if you look here, there's like server errors are one thing, response time, throughput. So they're common. Okay, they're very hastily like drawn sometimes things like this is the knee that you were asking earlier about, Matt. And I try to say like what they mean, how to diagnose them, recommendations for what to do next. I think that maybe you could have a look and tell me what you think, because I'm trying to put together like a way to be able to look at a graph and see like, oh, there's probably something wrong there. Like this, maybe let's talk about this knee, for example. It's called a knee or a hockey puck. I hear hockey puck more than knee,
stick.
actually. A hockey stick, sorry. And it basically means that it is an inflection point. It is a point beyond which the system can be said not to be able to handle that load anymore. So if you look here, this line here is the number of virtual users or requests per second, and it's just steadily increasing here. But the response time is pretty stable, after an initial bump until this point. And beyond this point, it just like goes up and has a very steep slope. And that should be a warning sign, because there was no spike in virtual users, still just increasing gradually. So it could be a sign that beyond that point, the system's already on the back foot, like can't really handle those requests anymore.
Yeah, that's I like this. I'm gonna take a look at this also afterwards. By the way, everyone, the K in K6 stands for knee, in case you were wondering.
Maybe only trust like 30% of what Matt says.
No, I gotta be precise. Yeah, that's true. I gotta be. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Because like we got this from a community member,
Sure.
and like I think we never really got to result analysis. So I'm sorry to everyone who asked a question about that, because those are, I guess, the most important questions. But like, I guess while we're scripting, you're testing you're because you just have to, you see if things work. And then somebody asked, how do you know? So this is, to me, is like one of the hardest parts, is because if you're taxing your generator too much, your computer, or whatever computer you're using to make the load, is gonna like max out, and it's gonna warp the results, because it's gonna be weird results. And so how can you figure out, this was a community question, how much load you can do from one computer? Because that seems like everything, you have to be precise, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? That's a
Okay.
classic
On what?
answer. It
On what?
depends.
On
I
what?
mean, are you running, I don't know, just are you trying to do this load test on a Chromebook?
Yeah,
Or are
let's
you
say yeah,
trying to do
because
it on,
K6 is high performance, and so let's say
yeah?
yeah. Yeah.
I'll say rule of thumb, because I agree with Paul. It is a nuanced answer, and one that's informed by experience as well. But a rule of thumb is 80%. If your load generator is consistently above 80% utilization in terms of memory or CPU, that's usually too high. Try to get it below the 80% level. And that's like, it might go up above that in the beginning, because in the beginning things are starting up, but if it's consistently above 80%, then at that point you don't know the effect that the load generator is having on your results.
Oh, this is a great
Yeah, I
answer.
mean, even at 80%, I'd be a little upset, because it's like that's going to affect my YouTube consumption. So that's
Yeah. I mean, that's
what's
really
going on with
important
this
stuff.
machine. Exactly.
Matt,
Exactly.
I think we need to have you back. I feel like we just rushed through a lot of topics, and we could have. It's so typical that we had like a structure and points, and then we're just like, okay, we're done.
Well, I thought we went like, I mean, we'll expose the plan, because I thought we were gonna try to work through the load test phases. I thought we did half. I think we did planning and
Yeah.
scripting to some degree,
Hmm.
but maybe result
Yeah,
analysis and
yeah.
execution was still.
Just means you
Yeah.
got to come back.
Yeah, no, it was really fun, and let me say thanks to y'all. Also, thanks especially to everyone in the community. Like, I really, that's the thing I like most about my job, is working with the open source engineers, and working with all of the people who are making like forum posts and like using things. It's really great.
Yeah. I think we will do another one whenever you're ready, Matt. You're always welcome back. I think there was so much we didn't get to cover. Thank you to
Right on.
everybody who asked questions as well. If you have any questions, you can always leave a comment on the video, and we'll still try
Yep.
to answer it if we don't answer it in like an office hours. You can always ask
Yeah,
us questions.
yeah, and maybe we can like respond to some questions like that were in
Yeah.
this chat that we didn't get to. Yeah, awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, everyone.
Well,
Yep.
thank you, Matt, for joining us. If both of you for joining me on Friday afternoon.
It was my pleasure.
That was definitely
Thank
fun.
you, everybody. Have a good weekend.